we're going to focus mainly on the Premier League here today, is Steven Gerrard on Aston Villa. What are your thoughts on what's going on there? Because for a variety of reasons, I listen to a lot of Aston Villa fans. I listen regularly to an Aston Villa podcast, believe it or not, because I know the guy involved there, and it's a brilliant listen, to be honest with you. But they've given up on Steven Gerrard big time. From what you've seen of them, is there any way back for Gerrard, or is it just like a matter of time before that he gets the bullet here?
No, and I listened to that Villa podcast as well on Sunday evening. With Conor Darty. It's a brilliant podcast. I'm sure even football fans will love to listen to it. But everything that you hear about the Steven Gerrard with Aston Villa, it just feels like it's completely a mismatch. It just seems to have gone really sour very quickly. Very it feels very difficult for Gerrard to get the fans back on side. A lot of fans that I've seen on Twitter and stuff and listening to a few things, it seems like they've gone away from what they had under Dean Smith, which was a real fighting spirit. That run they went on the Championship, you think of the players they had with kind of Hourihane, Grealish when he was there, and under Gerrard just seems it hasn't started well from this year, and obviously he's been unlucky with injuries. You have to say that. Brings in Carlos as marquee signing, gets injured. Brings in Kamara in midfield, gets injured, and then it's very hard to go from that. And he's had to do a bit of making up to do with Tyrone Mings, who's actually been really impressive in the last few weeks. But he keeps talking about lack of quality and a lack of creativity. But Gerrard's been there long enough that he should have put his stamp into the Villa side by now, and it really isn't working for him. And I think if you're an Aston Villa fan, the first time I noticed how poor they were was against Arsenal last year when towards the running. It was a 1-0 victory for Arsenal. Arsenal got Saka scored early in the first half, but Aston Villa were absolutely appalling. They offered very little, and you think that it seemed to bring a bit of a spark. Coutinho joined the club in January, but it just seems like he's almost getting in the way because they've got Emi Buendia, who I've watched for a long time at Norwich when he's in the Championship, and he absolutely teared it up for Norwich, and also played very well in his first season in the Premier League, but the year before COVID. And you watch him now, he's only getting 10 minutes here or 15 minutes here off the bench, and Coutinho's the man, and they've got two strikers and two number 10s, and they haven't got any wingers really, but Leon Bailey has flattered to deceive hugely. So when you're watching the Gerrard team at the moment, it's almost watching two different sides. You're watching the defensive unit and the offensive unit, and there seems to be really little play between the two. There's no play they go from back to front very quickly. There's no real passing through midfield, and you'd be worried for Aston Villa. We've had Andrew Blair-White on this podcast, and as he said on the podcast that I was on with him a couple of weeks before the start of the season, I was talking to him about Villa, and I was like, the one thing about Aston Villa is whatever about European aspirations, which is what their CEO, Christian Perslow, has talked an awful lot about. I was like, you don't want to get dragged into a relegation battle, and with how they've started the season and the last two the performances in particular, I'm not even talking about the results, you'd be really worried for Gerrard's job in particular at the moment, and also Aston Villa getting involved in that kind of 15th, 16th place relegation area.
Yeah, like you said, it's not even necessarily the results. That performance against Southampton, and Hasenhüttl is under massive pressure there as well. But that game was a disgrace of a football match. It was so boring, and things are bad when a team ekes out a win like that. And yes, it is really boring. But I didn't feel the love, the atmosphere in the stadium. I didn't feel the love for Steven Gerrard, and when that happens in a club, it's very hard to get back. Now, I always kind of bring back to Arteta with Arsenal, just because that's a sign of and it's not laziness in terms of always referring back to it, but it's a good kind of starting point of how a process going through it. But even in those very low points with Arteta, there was definitely something there that you just clung on to. Maybe even if it was the young players, or before that was the FA Cup win before he brought through the young players, where there's just nothing here outside of those for the first 10 games where Gerrard got off to that great start.
Yeah, and you're right there. There's something to cling on to, and as a football fan, when you hear talk of projects and progression, and give managers time, you want to have something to hold on to. And for Villa, it's very little. Obviously, they've got Jacob Ramsey, who is every time I watch them, he looks their best player. I know his brother's on loan at Norwich, I think, with Dean Smith, which is an interesting kind of take on that as well. And then there's a lot of talk about this Cameron Archer, their young centre forward who's been with the England 21s. He's on loan last year at Preston, I think it was, and even Gerrard got asked a question in his press conference the other day, and he was very, very quick to come back at a journalist question why he kept asking about why Archer wasn't playing, which is never a good sign. I think when a manager is kind of like that in the media and he's under pressure, I think it's that there's really naturally one outcome. In fairness to Steven Gerrard, he's going to have to try and come out punching, but his side is lacking any real bite, any real bit of personality in front of goal, any real confidence. There was a couple of chances for Villa on Sunday, but again, they weren't clear-cut chances. They weren't real distinct patterns of play. And like I said, if you're an Aston Villa fan, you're not happy with what you've seen. You've been promised a lot. They got rid of a very popular manager at the time, Dean Smith, who was an Aston Villa fan growing up. You've taken them back into the Premier League and, had them playing really good football. I know it had gone a little bit sour towards the end of his reign, but, Aston Villa's Christian Purslow and the owners obviously have big ambitions, but they're kind of going down the Everton route at the moment where they're talking a big game and seem to be signing players to appease the fans, but on big wages, but doesn't seem to be translating to the pitch yet. And as I said, Aston Villa, they've been in the Championship a couple of times now in the last few years, and there's very few clubs that are too big to go down. And Aston Villa at the moment, what I think they're saving grace is there is 2 or 3 teams that are going to be worse than them this year. But if they keep trying out performances like they have in the last 2 weeks, and, I've had the misfortune to watch them the last couple of times. Steven Gerrard will say, look, we've taken 5 points from City, Southampton and Leeds, but I think it's the manner of the last 2 performances that would worry Villa fans. And also they have a huge game now Monday night under the spotlight against Nottingham Forest, where both managers are under big pressure. And you often see it when, when 2 managers are under pressure, the clubs aren't afraid to, pull the plug if they lose that game. So Gerrard it's not going to be an easy game at the City ground as well for Villa.
Yeah, we've seen it a lot. Like it's Premier League managers have always been under pressure, but I don't think I've ever heard as many rumours about Premier League managers getting sacked and at the bottom. One thing to note, and Brendan Rodgers arguably wasn't sacked, or probably not even up for debate, probably wasn't sacked because of his contract situation, where I think there's rumoured talks of anywhere between 10 and 20 million payout left in his contract. So, but it's funny then seeing if Rodgers was sacked, Leicester might have won 4-0 at Forest, and everyone would have been like, that's the right decision. But arguably that international break gave Rodgers a chance to reset, and I know Forest should have gone 1-0 up, but Leicester were quite impressive, and they do still have a great team, so they could kick on and maybe aim for a top 10 finish all of a sudden after losing 7 of their first 8 games, which is absolutely amazing. So on that side of things, you think maybe give a manager like Gerrard a bit more patience and go weather the storm, but at some point you've got to see in that sort of sense, you got to see the way that it's going. And when there's no, like, even that City game, there was no way that there was no atmosphere and connection with the fans. It's I don't know, it's hard to see a way back from him in that sense. But I am kind of interested in that point with Rodgers, that he has kind of weathered the storm there, and they stuck with him, but because they had to, where these Premier League chairmen are just, pushing the button there maybe a bit too soon all the time. You even saw it there with the Wolves manager and Bruno Lage, that arguably Wolves have been playing well and they were just missing Diego Costa. They bring in Diego Costa and they sack him 2 weeks later.
Yeah, and the thing I would say about Villa, the difference with that is that it's the idea, and it's sometimes the managers, and we were talking about Stephen Kenny, the Ireland manager, and how when you're a manager of a Premier League club or an international side, you get almost judged as well on how you perform in the media. And what Steven Gerrard is talking about and some of the things he's saying would really frustrate Villa fans. So he was talking about, we came to Ellen Road to frustrate Villa. Now, I originally heard that in the interview straight away, and I thought...
Or frustrate Leeds, obviously, yeah.
Sorry, frustrate Leeds, sorry,
yeah.
And they went there to frustrate the opposition. And I listened to that originally and I went, geez, that was interesting. There was a bit of a weird one. Then listened to that Villa podcast and heard their frustration at it. And, you're judged also on what the things you're saying, and even the things that the issues Gerrard had with Mings taking the captaincy off and giving it to John McGinn, who hasn't exactly pulled up much trees this season, although played really well for Scotland in those 3 games in the break. But again, there seems to be rumblings of disconnect there between Gerrard, the fans, and it doesn't feel like it's going to change anytime soon. But as I say, it's very easy in the league now with how busy October is to go on a run of 2 or 3 wins and you parachute yourselves up the table. Look where Fulham and Newcastle are at the moment. That and Newcastle haven't had an amazing start to the season. They've been a little bit poor, but they're safely in the top half, and Everton with a 6-game unbeaten run in the league, they've pushed themselves back up there. So it's Gerrard's in a really difficult position. It's probably not a position he would have faced really in his time at Rangers, but this is a big worry for him. And like I said, if he was to be sacked in the morning, I don't think he could have too much complaints, because I think it's 6 league goals they've scored this season or something very poor. They've just been all over the shop going forward, and he can't turn around and keep saying, well, we lack quality, we lack this. I mean, he's got Coutinho, Buendia, proven goal scorers in Danny Ings and Watkins, paid big money for Leon Bailey, so he has to find a way of weathering the storm, because it's difficult, because again, Villa have all these big lofty plans, their owners have big plans, but if God forbid if they were to be plummeted down into the relegation zone or have a relegation battle, those plans go high in the sky, and they have to start again. So it's I don't think, if this continues another couple of weeks down, another couple of games, I think Gerrard will be given his marching orders. But I'm sure, when you see Bruno Lage getting sacked now, and Wolves haven't appointed someone straight away, like if Gerrard gets sacked, I think Christian Purslow and everyone in Villa has to have the next man ready in, and the next person in to sort it out, because you can't sack a manager and then try and have this game of trying to take, say, Wolves want to get Lopetegui from Sevilla, and what if he doesn't go, and then you're just second, third choice. So Villa, if they do push the button on Gerrard, they have to have someone ready and wait.
And last thing I want to mention on this is, and something you brought up to me when we were watching the Liverpool Rangers game together, that Steven Gerrard was at Anfield, and it made me think that. And look, this is rightly or wrongly, and people are fully entitled to. And he's played for Liverpool for years. You were just saying about an Aston Villa fan, and I find it hard to disagree. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, outside of maybe a golf course or La Liga that Pep Guardiola was pictured recently at, but you don't really see Klopp, Pep Guardiola, Conte, Arteta out and about outside of matches now. And you can argue, yes, Gerrard was looking to see Liverpool, but you mentioned to me that they're not playing Liverpool for a good while, so he doesn't even have that to hang his hat on there. So what were your thoughts there? I'm just again thinking of Aston Villa fans that I don't know if I'd be too happy if I saw Arteta out and about, maybe at a City game and with all his buddies after Arsenal had lost 3 or 4 games in a row or whatever.
Well, I do think it's going to be one of the big issues for Steven Gerrard, and it has been throughout his whole, what will be his managerial career now. And obviously when he's at Rangers, he was away from any sort of links to Liverpool, but he's still openly talking about Liverpool. And Wayne Rooney did it when he was Derby manager, talked about Manchester United in his press conferences, which I wouldn't personally be a huge fan of. But like I said, on Gerrard, like, he's so intrinsically linked with Liverpool, it's always going to be hard for him to have another Premier League club. And it was always said about him, when he took over at Villa. But I think the optics of when you're struggling, and I don't think it looks great. And like I said, it's another stick maybe for him to be beaten with. But as I said, like, there's some things you probably shouldn't do when you're under pressure as Villa manager. And I don't think going to Liverpool Rangers, even though he has a connection to both clubs in the Champions League, is probably the best idea.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It just means it's the optics of it, and like everything, rightly or wrongly, things are ultimately about optics a lot of the time, and it's the same in that regard. So